Shadows in broad daylight. The global mafia network. They operate in the shadows, but their reach extends far and wide. A network of organized crime syndicates wielding immense power and influence. From drug trafficking to human smuggling, arms dealing to money laundering, their tentacles extend into every corner of the globe, exploiting vulnerable governments and manipulating global systems for their own gain. Masked by layers of secrecy and intimidation, they infiltrate legitimate businesses, corrupt officials, and manipulate financial markets. Their influence can be felt in the corridors of power, often escaping justice through violence, intimidation, and corruption. The global mafia network is a complex web of interconnected organizations, collaborating and competing for control of lucrative criminal enterprises, infiltrating economies and influencing politics around the world, exploiting weaknesses in the global system to amass wealth and influence. Their influence can be seen in the erosion of democratic institutions. From Sicily to the world, a history of power and corruption. The roots of the global mafia can be traced back centuries to the impoverished regions of Sicily, where organized crime first emerged as a means of survival and protection. In the face of a weak state and rampant lawlessness, local strongmen formed secret societies, offering protection and dispensing justice outside the official channels. These early mafia groups, known as cosche, were bound by oaths of silence and loyalty, operating under a strict code of conduct known as omerta. As Italy industrialized and urbanized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the mafia adapted and expanded its operations. They infiltrated the burgeoning construction industry, extorting businesses and controlling labor unions. They established protection rackets, demanding payments from shopkeepers and businesses in exchange for protection from rivals and criminals. The rise of fascism in Italy in the 1920s saw a crackdown on organized crime, as Mussolini's regime sought to consolidate its power and eliminate rival sources of authority. Many mafia bosses were imprisoned or forced into exile, but the organization itself survived, albeit weakened. The chaos and upheaval of World War II provided new opportunities for the mafia to reassert itself. With the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, the mafia saw a chance to regain its former influence. They collaborated with the occupying American forces, providing intelligence and assistance in exchange for leniency and support. This alliance, born of expediency, would have far-reaching consequences, allowing the mafia to rebuild its networks and expand its operations into new areas, including drug trafficking and international smuggling. The puppet masters infiltrating governments from within. One of the most insidious aspects of the global mafia is its ability to infiltrate legitimate institutions, corrupting officials, and manipulating systems from within. They achieve this through a combination of bribery, extortion, and violence, targeting individuals in positions of power and influence. Politicians, judges, law enforcement officers, and even religious leaders are susceptible to their corrupting influence. Once they have compromised an individual, the mafia can use them to further their own interests. Corrupt officials can be blackmailed into awarding lucrative contracts to mafia-controlled businesses, turning a blind eye to criminal activities, or even obstructing justice. They can also be used to influence policy decisions, shaping legislation and regulations to benefit mafia enterprises. The methods used to infiltrate governments vary depending on the specific context. In some cases, mafia groups may provide financial support to political campaigns, effectively buying influence and ensuring favorable treatment once their chosen candidates are in power. In other instances, they may resort to more direct methods, such as blackmail, threats, or even violence against officials who refuse to cooperate. The consequences of mafia infiltration can be devastating for a country's governance and development. Corruption undermines public trust in institutions, erodes the rule of law, and creates an environment of impunity where criminal activity can flourish. It also diverts resources away from essential public services, enriching corrupt officials and their criminal associates at the expense of the wider population. The invisible hand, mafia-driven regime change. While their influence often operates subtly behind the scenes, there are instances where the global mafia's involvement in regime change operations becomes undeniably apparent. These are not random acts of violence, but calculated moves to destabilize governments and install regimes more favorable to their interests. The methods employed vary, from funding and arming rebel groups to orchestrating coups d'état and assassinating political leaders. Their motives are often rooted in economic gain, seeking to control lucrative resources, secure trafficking routes, or establish safe havens for their operations. One example is the alleged involvement of organized crime in the destabilization of certain Latin American countries. Drug cartels, with their vast wealth and firepower, have been accused of infiltrating governments, corrupting officials, and financing paramilitary groups to protect their drug trafficking routes and maintain their grip on power. In other cases, mafia groups have been linked to the financing and arming of rebel groups, seeking to overthrow governments deemed hostile to their interests. By providing material support to these insurgents, criminal organizations can exert significant influence over the course of conflicts, shaping outcomes to their advantage. The consequences of mafia-driven regime change can be disastrous for the countries involved. It often leads to prolonged instability, widespread human rights abuses, and a breakdown of law and order, creating fertile ground for further criminal activity and entrenching the power of these shadowy organizations.